Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. Today, we're picking the bones out of Liverpool's 3-0 rout of Manchester United. Arne Slot has begun life at Anfield with 3 wins from 3. As for Erik Ten Hag's side, they've already lost twice this season. So have Liverpool improved, or are Manchester United just not the test they once were? Right, joining me today, we've got the Athletic's Manchester United writer, Anka, and our Liverpool writer, James Pearce, who I've just heard was sat next to each other yesterday at Old Trafford. I would have loved to be a fly on the wall watching you both reacting to what was going on the pitch. But James, let's start with you. 3 wins from 3 to start for Arne Slot's era at Liverpool. Look, I looked at that fixture and I thought, wow, this is a massive test because this will technically show just where Arne Slot is with his team away at Old Trafford. But I guess by the sounds of his press conference before the game, he was a little understated about the whole thing, as per usual, James.
Yeah, that is very much the Slot way. It's he doesn't really do superlatives and building games up, and what a contrast between I remember sitting there listening to Klopp talk about the eyes of the world will be on this fixture and giving it all the hype that you would come to expect with the meetings that go on between the two biggest clubs in the Premier League. But Slot was very much like business as usual in terms of going the way he wanted to go about it, and I think that kind of calmness and composure reflected in Liverpool's performance on the day because it was mightily impressive. I think having it had been a solid start in terms of they were expected to beat Ipswich, expected to beat Brentford, but to go to United in the way they did and take them apart in their own backyard, that turns a solid start into an absolutely brilliant one to his reign.
Yeah, Carl, firstly, I have to congratulate you for double podding today. I know you've just finished doing Talk of the Devils this morning. What was the view from the gents at Talk of the Devils after what I guess was a bit of a blow of a defeat for Manchester United at Old Trafford?
General view on Talk of the Devils was that was painful and changes do need to be made. The concerning thing is what changes can be made outside of integrating players like Manu Ugarte for future endeavours. James is right. That was an impressive way Liverpool went about beating Manchester United. It's also concerning in that actually Liverpool didn't have to go to a ridiculous level on high gear to do it. They dominated in both penalty areas. Their defenders were stronger than Manchester United's attackers in those key moments. And then when they did win the ball back, they were brutal in going about their business. That's a first half for Casemiro to forget.
We do want to pick the bones out on Casemiro in a little while. But Carl, this is probably the most low energy I've seen you ever on the pod. Are you okay?
I'm doing all right. I got my cup of tea here.
All right.
I'll be fine.
This is good. Appreciate it, bro. James, there will be comparisons made naturally between Jurgen Klopp and Arne Slot. From where you're sitting, what sort of changes or tweaks has he made from the team he inherited from Jurgen Klopp?
Yeah, I think the biggest change, which is what we saw, especially in that second half yesterday, is control and game management has improved, especially when you think back to those 2 visits to Old Trafford back in March and April that were both highly damaging to effectively ruin Klopp's hopes of a kind of fairy tale goodbye, because both those games Liverpool should have won. Both times they were far too open, threw away 2-1 and 3-2 up in the FA Cup tie and lost 1-0 up in the league game and only drew. That felt like a defeat. So I think that was the really impressive thing yesterday, that 3-0 up after 57 minutes and the Olays are ringing out from the away end around Old Trafford, and it was they could have added a couple more goals, but it was what was most significant for me was the fact they barely gave United a sniff after that, and that I think the balance in the midfield is better now, where it's kind of like more kind of 2 sitting deep rather than 1, and then Szoboszlai operating more as number 10, and they just look a lot more secure in terms of the protection for the back line. And then, of course, it helps massively when you've got a front 3 like they have in Diaz, Jota and Salah that are able to absolutely wreak havoc.
Yeah, with the addition of Chiesa now as well, which would be really interesting. James, a lot has changed in the, in the back room for Liverpool. And let's also caveat this with the fact that, we're only 3 games in. There's going to be stiffer challenges ahead of this managing team. Are you surprised by just how well they've kicked on in terms of how they've been able to transmit the information to the players, and the players have taken heed so quickly to it as well?
Yeah, I have been surprised. I think because I think there was always that fear with Klopp going. It was like you don't really know what you've got until it's gone, almost, in terms of he was such a force of personality, and especially the fact it wasn't just Klopp going, but his entire backroom staff. There'd been no continuity at all. And I think the modern history of football shows you that when there's a lot of upheaval, that can lead to problems on the pitch. You only have to look at United in the post-Ferguson era trying to adapt to the loss of an iconic manager. It is remarkable when, it's been a summer when Liverpool have, Michael Edwards has come back in as FSG CEO of football. Then his first job is to appoint Richard Hughes, a new assistant sporting director, new technical director with Julian Ward coming back. And then they had to rebuild the entire backroom staff after giving the job to Arne Slot. Mm. And even that, I think Slot, it had to be viewed as a gamble because, yes, his track record at Feyenoord was very good, but, I think it's still a huge leap from Feyenoord to Liverpool, and he hadn't done it outside of his homeland. And then you have to also throw it into the context of a pre-season when he had less than a fortnight with that squad. When most of those players who played at Old Trafford because of the Euros and the Copa America only came back after the pre-season tour of the States. So when you frame it like that, the fact he's been able to get his ideas across so quickly, and the players have really embraced it. I think the work ethic really shone through, especially from that midfield 3 of Gravenberch, who I thought was the best player on the pitch, McAllister and Szoboszlai. It just looks like there's a real kind of unity there that is being created extremely fast.
Yeah, Carl, my natural question here is, and I want to talk about the press conference a little later, so I don't want to go into it too deeply, but if we're looking at a lot of changes at Liverpool, there have also been a lot of changes at Manchester United, but I guess a bit more continuity in terms of the person in charge. Does it worry you that some of those ideas are still not being translated to the players on the pitch as well, in terms of learning from past mistakes, for instance?
First of all, you deeply wounded me when you said Liverpool face tougher tests. That's a heck of a thing to say after facing Manchester United.
Manchester City, without being rude. Come on, man.
You're doubling down, I see. Okay. Second of all, I think, yes, the way Liverpool have iterated upon what's come before and how Slot has transmitted his ideas is very, very impressive. Also, I mean, that's why they got Arne Slot, right? Mm. This is what what happens when you have good succession planning, where you look at your squad, you look at the individuals available in it, you really, weigh and measure and see what style of play is best, are they most capable of playing, and then you go out and get a manager who can carry that out. And yes, while there have been tweaks, and James is correct, once it was 3-0, Liverpool did control things very well. Robertson also explained that as well, rather than go for 5 or whatnot. They did have large periods of time where they just took the ball away from Manchester United. The concern for Manchester United is Erik Ten Hag is talking about patience. He's saying that this is a young team, a team that needs the foundations built in, and that they need to bring players in. There was a question in the press conference always asked, do you have any regrets that Manuel Ugarte was brought in towards the end of the window rather than towards the start, especially when you've been tracking him for so long? And then Ten Hag pointed out that Ugarte's not played any football over pre-season. He's last played meaningful football in May, and that it's going to take time to build up his fitness. He said it could take weeks, it could take months. And that is a concerning thing for Manchester United, in that Ten Hag is now starting his 3rd season in charge, and he's saying it could take weeks or months for players like Ugarte to be properly integrated, for a style of football that he wants to do to be properly integrated into the team. Whereas top 4 rivals, historical rivals, seem to have coalesced better. How does Ten Hag fix things quickly? I don't think he has enough sand in his hourglass at this point in time.
Yeah, fair enough. As you've talked about that press conference, well, let's get into it. Understandably, Ten Hag would have been on the back foot. They've just lost a big game at Old Trafford to one of their biggest rivals. But then there was this bit of an argument, I would guess, with a reporter. I know you were there in that room at that time, Carl.
Mm-hmm.
What did you make of it?
Yeah, it's an interesting tete-a-tete. So, Ian Ladyman asked Erik Ten Hag, you've been in charge for 2 seasons, and does it? I'm paraphrasing here, so please forgive me. Does it concern you that Manchester United are making some of the same mistakes that they've constantly been making? Ten Hag then asked, well, what mistakes are you seeing? To which the reporter outlined a series of mistakes. He said, turning the ball over in your own half, being susceptible to counterattacks, and whatsoever. Ten Hag said, I'm sorry that you see it that way. I think since my time in England, only Manchester City have won more trophies, which is an answer he gave in Friday's press conference, and something he also brought up during pre-season, is that Ten Hag has been here for 2 seasons. He won a League Cup in his first season, won the FA Cup in his second season. When the reporter then offered the fact, he said, with all due respect, you were fantastic at Wembley against Manchester City, but you also played quite poorly against Cambridge. Slight error, it was Coventry in the semi-final. So there was some needle. And this is a really interesting situation in that Ten Hag is pleading for patience and saying this is a work in progress and this team is going to take time to get to where they need to be. But when he is asked how long will it take and does it concern you that other teams seem to be on their timeline faster, he then, his rebuttal is, well, I've won 2 trophies in 2 years, so let's not worry. Trying to be the underdog while also trying to be a champion at the same time is difficult. You've got feet in 2 different stalls right there. And how Ten Hag gets those things to come together is going to be a major test, because as you saw on Sunday, and as we've seen at the start of the season, Manchester United aren't quite there yet. And if I've got a whiteboard and I write that sentence out, I'm circling the there and saying, well, we have to spend several articles and podcasts explaining what the there is, because Ten Hag doesn't necessarily want to explain it. And the yet, I also have to circle that and go, well, is this going to happen in weeks, months, years, whatnot?
And does it also worry you? I keep using the word worry just because I'm sitting here as a fan, objectively, going, is that what I want to hear after such a big defeat? Ugarte's not ready to play at the top level. I've won loads of trophies, but the football's not great, but I've won loads of trophies. I mean, does that fill fans with confidence that this team is heading in the right direction?
We're talking on a Monday after they've lost to Liverpool, so fan reception is different. There have been some voice notes to talk with levels, and you can sense the tone of voice there. This is a very, very difficult thing to say. James is correct. A lot of teams have had a bisected or truncated preseason because of the Euros and Copa America. However, Liverpool seem to have a clearer sense of what they need to be doing than Manchester United at this point in time. I think it's really, really interesting that James says Ryan Gravenberch was the standout player at Old Trafford. Gravenberch's a former Ajax player. Ten Hag used him to great effect in the 21-22 season. Gravenberch played when Ten Hag's Ajax beat Arne Slot's Feyenoord team. Gravenberch was nearly exclusively a final third player. He was, all of his activity was in the opposition, towards the opposition's penalty area, whereas because Ten Hag saw Gravenberch's ability to receive the ball between the lines, pass deftly, receive on the pressure, and gone, you go affect the game closer to the opposition's goal. Whereas Slot's gone, that's quite interesting. Let's see if I can affect games by having you deeper. I think what's also interesting is how Gravenberch is being coached through this transformation. This is one of the hardest things you'll probably have to do as a football player, to go from being an attacking player to a defensively minded player, and also do it having made the jump from the Bundesliga and the Eredivisie to doing it in the Premier League, where players are bigger, stronger, more tactically varied than ever before. And yet, rather than have Gravenberch sat on an island by himself as a single pivot trying to protect the back four, as Casemiro often has to do, or as Mainu sometimes has to do, when Gravenberch has instances where he's not in the correct position, there's Alexis on his bike. So Liverpool's midfield setup is 2 physical phenomenons that are shepherding through a very prodigious young talent as he's going from being an attacking player to being a defensive midfielder, and they just swarmed a Manchester United midfield that started with a 32-year-old who is looking like he's in the middle of a physical decline, and a 19-year-old whose body's still growing and is still picking up the rigmaroles of Premier League football in Mainu. And then in the second half, it was Toby Collier making his starting, his first debut in the senior team, trying to deal with
a 20-year-old, doing that. A lot.
A 20-year-old trying to deal with an athlete of the level of Dominic Szoboszlai. You are correct. The word is worried.
Yeah. Well, James, then let's flip this. I guess slightly contrasting, because we did start talking about Erik Ten Hag in press conferences. Let's look at Arne Slot in press conferences, his demeanour. And it's probably easier as he's had such a good start. But also, does that demeanour and his stance in that space translate to what we're seeing on the field as well?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, he's very matter of fact, very understated. Even first up in his press conference at Old Trafford yesterday, it was, the question was, could that have gone any better for you coming here to Old Trafford for the first time as a Liverpool manager? I mean, put it into context. You have to go back 88 years for the last Liverpool manager who won his first league meeting at Old Trafford, George Kay, back in 1936, and Slot just said, no, I don't think it could have gone any better. and that was it. That's just the way, no gushing praise. And he does this thing as well, which is interesting, is when you try and ask him specifically about individuals and the importance of certain individuals. And of course, yesterday, Salah and Diaz were big talking points, and Gravenberch, because I thought that was a big step forward for him in the context of his Liverpool career. But he always takes the conversation back to the collective. It's all about, well, yes, he was great, but the reason why he was great was because, in Gravenberch's example, he kept going back to look at the work that Szoboszlai and McAllister did around them. Look at how good Van Dijk and Konate were in terms of stepping into that space and finding the right passes into the midfield trio. So, I think the team does at the minute on the field reflect the way that Slot is off it, in terms of being, just this very composed, laid-back unit, if you like.
I'm also seeing things that Liverpool stopped doing in the last 2 or 3 seasons, but have done previously under Jurgen Klopp. So the long switches that Virgil van Dijk used to do, they're back. And something I found quite interesting was just how much time Slot spent in the technical area giving players further instruction as to what to do. There were 2 or 3 times, particularly on Liverpool's goal kicks, where he was really, really keen to get Jota wider and really force that overload for Manchester United, so eventually the ball can be reversed and Luis Diaz could be made in loads of space. He's a good coach. And he's not only taken a lot of the things that worked for him at Feyenoord, but he's also iterated, and he's beginning to innovate as well. This Liverpool team are not going to be any slouches this season.
Yeah.
And that is painful for me to say.
I think that word innovation is interesting, because I want to just circle back to Ryan Gravenberch and actually how he did stand out yesterday, considering, we spoke about it, James, previous pod, how Liverpool missed out on Zubimendi, for instance. Trying to get that kind of innovation into a player who's not well suited to that space must talk about how the manager is able to convey his ideas, but also see beyond what perhaps other people might see in such a player, and actually to instill a confidence in a 22-year-old to hold his place in such a big game. That's got to be impressive.
Yeah. It really is. And I must admit, when the window shut on Friday night, there was a lot of negativity around Liverpool's summer because this feeling of, why have they not done more? Why have they not added more depth to the squad? Because it must be unprecedented that a new manager comes in and the only new signing is Federico Chiesa, who, yes, a quality player, but essentially he's to complement and to add a bit more depth in that forward line. And I think if you'd said to a Liverpool fan in May, the only new signing added to the squad would have been another wide forward, you'd have been scratching your head in disbelief. And yes, of course, they did the deal for Mamadashvili, but he won't become a Liverpool player till summer 25. And I shared those concerns that they didn't buy another defensively minded midfielder, because it has been a problem. It was a glaring problem last season. It was a glaring problem the year before when Fabinho's form absolutely fell off a cliff. But yeah, I think there is a lot to be said. If you don't believe there's an alternative on the market who exactly fits the bill to what you want, and that was what Liverpool decided when Zubimendi turned them down, then Slot decided, well, I can actually turn Gravenberch into what I need in that position. And yes, there are definitely tougher tests to come. But the signs have been so promising. And that was like by far and away the biggest day that Gravenberch has had in a Liverpool shirt, because he's had a difficult couple of years, really, because you think went to Bayern Munich and Tuchel never seemed to fancy him there, and he barely played. And then even last season, he just showed little flashes of quality in a Liverpool shirt. He never held down a place in the team. He never really grabbed a game like he did at Old Trafford on Sunday. And I think it's really interesting as well that the profile of what Liverpool are after and what Slot wants in that position has changed, since Klopp, because, I spoke to someone at Liverpool last week who said, if they had signed Caicedo, for argument's sake, last summer, would he really have fitted what Slot wants in terms of a highly technical player who's able to operate in really tight spaces and is press resistant and is so good at finding space between the lines like Gravenberch did on Sunday? I think there's a big question there, because Slot wants a different type, where Klopp wanted more of a destroyer in that position, someone more physical to break up play. So the whole balance of that midfield has changed now, with kind of two sitting deeper and one pushing on. And at the minute, Gravenberch looks like he could well be the answer. But of course, you want to see him do it over a prolonged period.
Yeah, Carl, from one midfielder who looks like he's finding his feet to perhaps another who looks like he's maybe losing his feet. Let's talk about Casemiro. It wasn't a great day for Casemiro, one of the most decorated players in world football. Can we try to explain what that is, why that may seem the way it was against such a big opposition?
Yeah, it is one. It's a half to forget. Casemiro lost the possession 10 times in that half. I believe Gary Neville compared it to his game in 2011 against West Brom, where he made, I think it's Jerome Thomas. He said he made Jerome Thomas look like Cristiano Ronaldo across 71 minutes. And then a day afterwards, he told Alex Ferguson that he was going to retire and he never played for United again. I don't think that this will go down as Casemiro's retirement game, if only because United aren't necessarily blessed with an assortment of riches in midfield areas to the same level that Liverpool are. Casemiro will still have a role to play between now and the end of the season. Ten Hag said that as well. The concern is there is a physical decline there in Casemiro. He is getting, for the second goal, he was bullied off the ball by Luis Diaz in a way that Casemiro did not get bullied off the ball for the majority of his Real Madrid career. And as recently as 2022, did not get bullied off the ball. But he is now, there's that phrase about how the boxer ages in the ring. And I think he has absorbed so many punches that he's not able to weather the storm anymore. Something that's also concerning about Casemiro and Manchester United's midfield in general is there are no safety nets. There's no collective safety net for if Casemiro loses the ball or Casemiro tries an overambitious pass and the ball gets turned over. The plan for defensive transitions revolves around a individual winning a tackle in an important area, whereas for Liverpool, during those defensive transitions, there are three individuals who all work together, one to delay, one to essentially shuttle somewhere into a less dangerous area where that cohesiveness isn't there. So Casemiro is a player going through a physical decline, and he's not having his weaknesses being hidden up by a system that still requires him to win 80% plus of his physical duels, and he can't do that anymore. So the slide is looking worse. Taken off at half-time. Ten Hag stressed in the post-match press conference that he did not leave at half-time, contrary to some social media rumours. But he did say, when you're 2-0 down against Liverpool, you need to take some risks. And one thing we thought was we needed someone who can cover ground. And that's why Toby Collier came into the team. And that's one of those statements that I think is going to sting a bit. The fact that this 20-year-old academy graduate is now able to cover ground better than a 32-year-old who, as recently as last year, was the captain of the Brazil national team, is a 5-time Champions League winner and whatnot. And yes, Casemiro is one of the most decorated players in world football. He, for a very, very long time, was considered one of the best defensive midfielder players in the world. And it was something of a pleasant surprise when he turned up at Manchester United, because the idea was, well, he looked like he was going to retire at Real Madrid for a short space of time.
Well, joining us now, we have our football correspondent, David Ornstein. And look, it wasn't all sweetness and light at Old Trafford for Liverpool, especially post-match when Mohamed Salah seemed to cast doubt on his future. David, bring us up to speed with this one. You know, where does this leave the saga with Mo Salah's contract situation?
Well, I don't think it's a saga. I think it's quite a straightforward case of Liverpool not yet approaching Salah and his representatives about a potential extension. And so, for all intents and purposes, and the only thing he can say is that this is his last season at the club, because it is, as things stand. That could change. It wouldn't surprise me if they try and structure something, because he's such a fantastic player, still seemingly in the absolute prime of his career, delivering. Obviously, the move to Saudi Arabia didn't materialise a year ago. Liverpool rejected the approaches of Al Ittihad, and I revealed before this transfer window opened, just after the end of last season, that Mo Salah is completely expected to stay at Liverpool during the summer window just gone, or hasn't fully closed yet. And that was his intention, that was the expectation of Liverpool, that was the understanding of the Saudi Pro League, and that this might be one to revisit in the summer of 2025. But we don't know anything about the outcome to this situation yet. Clearly Mo Salah mentioning it in public could be construed as applying pressure to Liverpool. Virgil van Dijk has spoken about it recently too, on his own situation with the contract expiring at the same time. We've not heard anything, to my knowledge, from Trent Alexander-Arnold, who is the third member of that trio who is out of contract in the summer of 2025. And this is, a massive topic for Liverpool. And it's something that's on the in tray of Richard Hughes, the sporting director, who's made a fantastic start to his Liverpool career with the appointment of Arne Slot and the handling of a transfer window, which we may come on to speak about, that received a lot of scrutiny, yet appears to be very shrewd so far. But this is sort of the elephant in the room. Yeah. If you're looking at the three of them, you'd probably move heaven and earth to keep hold of Trent Alexander-Arnold because of his age profile, his unique skill set. There's no one else that really does what he does in European football. The likely market for him, if he were to be available as a free agent, the likes of Real Madrid and many more, I'm sure would be looking into it if they're not already. And he's Mr. Liverpool. He's from the city, came up through the academy, and that one, he's vice captain. It seems inconceivable, but they've got to actually do a deal. And the other two, I totally appreciate it. It's at a stage of their careers where they will have a major say in this as well. Do they want to continue? Virgil van Dijk is the captain, but of course, maybe he has other ambitions. Seems very happy at Liverpool, but again, deal would need to be done. And Mo Salah, that's the big topic of conversation, because it's another player who could surely walk into any squad in world football and continue to excel. And maybe he wants that to be at Liverpool, but the deal makers need to make it happen.
I don't think it's a big shock that it's kind of reached this point with Salah, because let's not forget he had a very difficult second half of last season, when there was a period there when he really struggled when he came back from the injury he suffered at AFCON. Just couldn't get his rhythm back. The goals dried up. You had the well publicised spat with Klopp on the touchline at West Ham. So I think I don't think anyone in kind of April, May was saying stick a 3-year extension under his nose and get him to sign it. But I think the summer, they're having a proper break this summer, has been an absolute godsend for him. He's come back looking extremely strong, beat everyone in all the fitness testing at the AXA when Slot put them through their paces. And, what is it? 3 goals, 3 assists, 3 games so far. He's an absolute machine, and he's made a mockery of those suggestions back in the spring that maybe he'd kind of peaked and was on the way down. And I think now Liverpool are going to have to act, because yes, we know FSG, the owners, they're risk adverse, I think, when it comes to players in their 30s, and wary about giving long extensions, especially to someone on Salah's kind of money, because he's not going to be willing to take a pay cut, is he? And was it £350,000 a week basic plus bonuses, and and Michael Edwards, when you go back to his previous stint as sporting director, now CEO of football, he was all about, you've got to take the emotion out of the decision-making process. You forget what someone has done up to this point. It's all about, is this the right use of the resources? And Will Salah, yes, he's still brilliant at 32, but if you gave him another 3 years, would he still be doing it at the top level at 35? That's what Liverpool have to keep asking themselves. And the way that they work in terms of the financial model, of course, if they committed that kind of money to someone who suddenly did fade and became less of a leading light and more of a fringe player, then that has a big impact in terms of the finance they can spend on a replacement. But, the evidence is growing and growing that Salah isn't going anywhere in terms of his influence at the top level. And I don't think he's ready to go to the Saudi Pro League next summer. And of course, he'll be inundated with offers, crazy financial offers if he's a free agent. But yeah, for me, he looks like a man who still wants to rewrite the history books at Anfield. And I think those comments on Sunday were just a little nudge to Liverpool to try and speed up the process.
Carl, I'm just going to come to you in just a sec in terms of the transfers of both teams. But while we've got David super quickly, just a quick note what you think, or just a quick note really on what you view as Liverpool's transfer policy this summer. We've talked about Chiesa, we also talk about Mamadashvili, who doesn't start till next season, of course. But it's been pretty quiet for Liverpool.
It has been quiet, but quiet doesn't mean bad. Sometimes you could say less is more. And from the opening rounds of fixtures this season, I'd argue that Liverpool look the best team in the Premier League. The most settled, exciting. They're playing better football right now than they were towards the end under Jurgen Klopp. So fair play to Arne Slot and his staff so far. And also credit to Richard Hughes. I've said this a few times on air, and some fans have reacted quite badly. But I think bit by bit, people are starting to say similar things. It's just watching, listening, and talking to people who are better versed in the situation than us. And they're very complimentary. And I speak to other clubs, directors, people that move in a similar world, sporting directors, technical directors. And so far, they're taking their hat off to Richard Hughes, who arrived from Bournemouth. And there was some scrutiny around that. Is he good enough for the job at Liverpool? Michael Edwards clearly thought so, because that was his pick as sporting director of Liverpool when he took the role as chief executive of football for Fenway Sports Group. He didn't have much time to get his feet under the table. He was working at Bournemouth, and of course he would have had an eye on his next job, but that wouldn't have been easy, nor would have replacing Jurgen Klopp after 9 years at the club, and the power and influence and the stature of that man and the success that he enjoyed. And there was the well-documented situation involving Xabi Alonso. Liverpool clearly admired him and looked into it. It became clear to them that it wouldn't be feasible. But that was high profile, and they received a lot of criticism when he decided to stay at Bayer Leverkusen. So where would they go next? They ran a process. They ended up with Arne Slot. There was scrutiny on that, taking a coach from the Dutch league. They haven't had that much success in the Premier League. And let's see, it's very early days, but the early indications are extremely promising. He had to set about instilling a new culture and environment at the AXA training complex, employing new staff in various positions, bringing deals to the table for departures, such as Fabio Carvalho, a Sepp Vandenberg, overseeing that and raising yet more money through exits. Liverpool have been so good at that, profit. And then looking at what they could do incoming. And they decided that they would only do things that would certainly add to the squad and improve it. So a number 6 was on the agenda. Everybody could see that a mile off, that it was something that Liverpool, if they could do, should do. And they were in agreement with that, but it had to be the right player. And they targeted Martin Zubimendi. They got far in the deal. Ultimately, he decided to stay at Real Sociedad, but no panic. Don't suddenly knee-jerk to an alternative that might not be quite right for you. Perhaps go with your internal existing options until the right opportunity arises. Maybe that'll be Martin Zubimendi in the future, in the way that Virgil van Dijk was after they missed out on him when he was at Southampton one summer and then signed him in January. Or maybe it will be somebody else entirely, or maybe nobody at all, because Ryan Gravenberch takes to the role with aplomb, and Trey Naomi, if I rises to the fore. Let's see. And then other positions. Well, goalkeeper for the future to succeed Alisson, one of the best around, Mamardashvili. Many clubs looking at that and saying, great piece of recruitment from Liverpool for 2025 onwards. They had clearly considered the wide position because Anthony Gordon was on the agenda before the PSR deadline. That didn't materialise, but it gave an indication that maybe somebody might come in that position. I thought it was going to take a notable departure, like a Luis Diaz, who surprisingly hasn't been offered a new contract, or certainly hasn't signed one since he joined from Porto, and that's maybe one to watch, because in normal circumstances, Liverpool would reward players who have excelled so much, and that hasn't happened just yet. But I don't think the wide player was sort of top of the agenda. Clearly, number 6 was, and maybe half an eye on a central defender for the future with Van Dijk and the contract and his age, and Sepp Vandenberg leaving, and there was uncertainty over Joe Gomez. But bang, out of the blue, this deal for Federico Chiesa, which I don't see any downside to it. He's a really good player when available. His contract had wound down to its final 12 months. Juventus needed to do business. The price seems to be a potential bargain if he can stay fit and contribute to the level we know he's capable of producing. So that feels like another no-brainer in a long list of many surprise but effective Liverpool recruits. And that was it. I definitely think they were keen to be brave and stand by the courage of their convictions, to not do anything just for the sake of it, and to work with what they have. And despite external noise from people like us and sections of the fan base, do what they believe is right. And mistakes can be very costly, especially at a club that doesn't have unlimited resources and tries to operate sustainably. And they've seen that other clubs have spent recklessly and it hasn't worked out. And so to this point, I think it's a job really well done by Richard Hughes and those around him. But these are embryonic stages. You know, we could come back from the international break, things could change, and we'll be having a very different conversation. The one thing that Richard Hughes will be held to account for clearly is the 3 contracts that we've talked about before now. I've got to say, that was an inherited problem, was Jurgen Klopp, but that's something that's on his desk now, even though it's an FSG thing ultimately. Richard Hughes will have to handle it, and I reckon he'll have a plan for it as well. We just don't know exactly what that plan is yet and whether he'll be able to deliver on it. But quietly, I would say that Liverpool had one of the best markets in the Premier League, and they look really well set to have a competitive season in the 9 months ahead. Okay,
Carl, super quick on Manchester United. In contrast, Liverpool have been quiet. Manchester United have had a whole heap of changes, from Barada in the back room, Wilcox, Ashworth, and then you look at the signings of players: De Ligt, Yoro, Zirkzee, Ugarte. It's been a lot of noise around Manchester United in a way that there actually hasn't, if you think about it, just from an outsider's perspective, for Liverpool in terms of their changes.
There's always going to be noise about Manchester United. That comes part and parcel without being Manchester United, unfortunately. As James outlined, an entire backroom staff changed for Liverpool, and I think it didn't get as much noise as the recruitment of Rene Hake and Ruud van Nistelrooy for Manchester United. those things just happen. In terms of the change going over at Manchester United, this is really interesting in that you can read the 24-25 season as season 3 of Erik Ten Hag, or you can read it as year 0 of Ineos.
It's a very good business-like way of putting it, sir.
Your mileage may vary after you've lost 3-0 against one of your biggest rivals at home. However, I think what is being put forward by the new leadership model at Manchester United is that this is just the beginning of something that will take time. And this is probably why Erik Ten Hag himself is talking about things taking time. So Manchester United have gone out, changing backroom staff, 2 new assistant managers in, assistant coaches around Ten Hag have moved out. Like you've outlined, the executive team above Ten Hag, and 5 permanent signings and many more outgoings as well. So the good promising thing, if you're a Manchester United fan, is United have addressed nearly every single area of need in their squad. So if you look at their FA Cup final starting 11, the thing that you look at that squad saying, well, they need to get another centre forward because Anthony Martial was going to depart on a free. They also need another centre back because Rafael Varane was going to depart on a free. Lenny Yoro is one of those centre back. He got injured, then came in Matthijs de Ligt. They also seemed to be a situation going on with defensive midfield because Casemiro didn't play in that cup game, and Amrabat returned back to Fiorentina on loan, and that defensive midfield situation now appears to be resolved somewhat with the recruitment of Manuel Ugarte. In addition to that, an opportunity seemed to have come up with the right back situation. I think quite a few United fans might have preferred a left back, but the right back situation to change from a full back like Aaron Wan-Bissaka to go to one like Mazraoui is particularly interesting there as well. So maybe if you're a United fan, you might have wanted to see how much money was left to get an extra forward. I know there was some talk about Ivan Toney or Dominic Calvert-Lewin, but that died down as the window evolved. And maybe we're talking right now, Luke Shaw is again dealing with some form of injury complaint, and Malacia is coming back from a long-term knee injury as well. So he might be more of a bonus than a guarantee. But in theory, the squad is stronger now than what it was last season. And therefore, in theory, all of these new players seem to be in this pursuit of a game model that was effective at points in the 22-23 season, but also had concerns at points in the 22-23 season. Yes, Erik Ten Hag won the League Cup and finished 3rd in his first season. He also had a very unfortunate result at Anfield, which James might want to bring up, but I want to just keep moving past. There is also, like we've said before, about the central midfield model. Manchester United have had several games last season and the season before that where the front press wants to go very high, but isn't the most coherent or to the level or consistency of Liverpool's front press. But they've also got a problem where their back four tends to stand quite close to their own penalty area. So there's a gap in central midfield, and in that gap in central midfield, teams can just swarm through. I think not only you talk about how Arne Slot's able to communicate ideas to his team, I think his press conferences at Old Trafford were quite illuminating. He very matter-of-factly explained to Sky Sports what Liverpool did. He said, when you look at United's press, if you can pass through them, you get them running a lot more. And one of the big things were if you keep Diaz and Salah high, when you regain the ball, you can get the ball to them, and there's always a 1v1. Man United's rest defence is not top 3 level, right? To be quite precise about it. And I asked Erik Ten Hag about this rest defence situation before the Community Shield, and he said he addressed it, but also it would take time. And this is the concern in that, call it year 3 Ten Hag, call it year 0 Ineos, however you want to call it, the thing that really seems to be the biggest concern for everyone around Manchester United is, when does this all bake in?
Yeah. I think it feels like a recurring theme. Let's end on this one, James. It's all nice with 3 games in and 4 points and no goals conceded. But Champions League begins after the international break. You know, it's a new format, more games. Can Liverpool keep up this momentum?
The signs are promising, but yeah, I think you're right that it. I think what was it? Probably last year, this time you had Tottenham fans dreaming, didn't you? And we know how that one worked out. So, I think you just have to frame it in the context of what he walked into and what he's produced already is nothing short of remarkable. But Slot will know better than anyone. You know, he wasn't swanning around Old Trafford on Sunday like a fellow who had cracked it. He knows this is very much a work in progress, and you know, a lot of those players who have barely had a look in, you know, people like Harvey Elliott, who had a brilliant pre-season, they're going to be really, really important to him after the break, because, you know, what is it, Forest at home, then his first, you know, midweek test, AC Milan away, you know, Bournemouth at home, then you've got the Carabao Cup kicking in, and you know, and then, you know, November is absolutely, you know, it's on the one hand, you know, tasty, but also daunting in a way as well. When you've got, I think you got Brighton, Leverkusen, Villa, Southampton, Real Madrid, and Man City in quick succession. So
tasty fixtures there.
Yeah, I think it's a better start than any Liverpool fan could have hoped for. But yeah, let's wait and see, because yeah, swiping Man United aside, unfortunately for Carl, is no longer the benchmark in terms of having a fantastic season.
Let's stop it there before this gets this gets naughty. All right, gents, thank you so much for your time. David's had to head off.
Sorry,
Carl and James as well. Really appreciate you.
Referee.
Ding, ding, ding. I'm calling it off. You can hear more from Carl on our Manchester United pod, Talk of the Devils, and also James on our Liverpool podcast, Walk On. We'll be back tomorrow for a deep dive into the biggest story of the day. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anka, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.